Hi,
Hey
Jen.
Josh, how are you? Hey Josh, nice to talk to you again.
It's really great to talk to you too.
Thank
We
you.
have a very hard act to follow on Blogging Heads. Our former Slate colleague Brian Curtis just had a conversation with Bob Lipsyte, I think a couple weeks ago, and they were
I
also
know.
talking about the Olympics. And
Yes.
Bob, an eminent sports writer, compared the Olympics to softcore porn and called the
Yes.
athletes sex workers.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's really
We're
going to up
just-
the ante on what kind of rhetoric we're going to have to bring today.
I know. I know I can't write as well as either of them, so I'm just going to have to say lots of really silly things just to try and compete.
All right, well, let's
you know-
start the silliness with your
Okay.
extremely, I'm going to call it insane venture of going to Canada because you hate American Olympics television coverage that much.
Yeah.
You are now in Montreal.
I'm in
Tell
Montreal.
us how that's going for you.
It's going great. It had been a while since I had watched the Olympics in Canada. It's been 8 years. I've watched the last two.
Two
in
whole
Britain.
Olympiads you've missed.
That's well in Britain. Yes, I went even further afield in search of other coverage. But you know what? I have discovered that something that I had forgotten, which is that the best thing about watching the Olympics in Canada is that you can watch CBC, and as I'm here in Montreal, I can also watch the French language version. They get very excited. They're very excitable. But you can also watch NBC, so it's the best of both worlds. And a lot of the time, here's a terrible confession, they get the same feed. So you're
Oh,
seeing
dear.
the same images, but it's just you get to choose whose commentary you listen to.
So it's actually
and-
like a good experiment. You have the same exact pictures, but so that's the control, and then you have
Right.
your Frenchies, your Canadians,
Yeah.
and your Americans to sort of compare and contrast.
Exactly. And what I've discovered is that although there are national differences, partly because the Canadians are sitting on a duck egg right now when it comes to medals. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon, and so far Canada's got 0 medals of any colour.
They're behind
But-
Togo.
They're behind Togo, as they keep noting. But
Have they actually noted that on TV that they're
Oh, they
behind Togo?
have. Yes, in Thursday's newspapers, both in French and English, were full of, should we panic? All of the newspapers, their headline was some variant on, is it time to panic yet? And I think in both English and French, it was noted that they were behind Togo in the medal table.
I think it's just
but-
poor form of the Canadians to insult Togo, sort of take out their
Yeah.
their disappointments on that country.
Yeah.
I'm going to step up right now and defend Togo against these baseless Canadian attacks.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been big in Burkina Faso, and I'm with you. And as the Canadians say, the second week's still coming. There's still a chance. All is not lost. It's a little bit. Things are looking a little bit tight for the Canadians right now. But here's what I've noticed about
Okay,
TV
what have you
commentary:
noticed?
that although there are different personalities, different histories, the thing that stays the same is that different sports and disciplines have different levels of harshness. Like in English and French, in the USA and in Canada, the diving commentators are incredibly harsh.
Really?
As an amateur, I can't even swim, but I love to critique the dives. And, I think, that was, I can see it wasn't perfect, it's not going to win, but they immediately yell, that was a total miss, or, well, he's going to be back in Halifax, crying by the end of the week. I mean, they're just totally harsh. And then you turn over to NBC, and they're a little, the words are different, but the harshness is still the same. They're like, oh, God, can you believe that? And, his knees were bent. I'm fine with that. So, but I'm loving
this is a big hobby horse of mine, and I wanted to talk about the gymnastics commentary on NBC.
Yes.
The diving,
Yes.
I think you're right that it's harsh, but I don't know if you been watching Tim Daggett, Elfie Schlegel. I hope I got that right, and Al Troutwig on NBC during the gymnastics.
I have. I find it very difficult to watch women's gymnastics. Nothing to do with the commentary, just the nature of what they're doing to themselves and just seeing, it's a little bit like standing outside an emergency room. I mean, it's too much. But other than that, with that proviso, yes, I have been watching the NBC coverage of the Olympics, of the gymnastics, excuse me.
Well, now that you make it sound like we're watching sort of like, cruelty to children, like child abuse.
Yes.
It makes my complaints about the NBC commentary seem a little trifling.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to press on, though, and I think maybe we can circle back around to the crimes against children. Because that's probably important, too. But I've watched a ton of sports in my day, June. Probably,
I know that.
Probably more than any one man should in a lifetime.
Quite.
And I've never seen anything like these NBC gymnastics commentators for this reason. When somebody fails, they take it as a personal affront to them. Yeah. Like, it's an insult. How dare they fall off the balance beam? I'm Tim Daggett. Yeah. I expect more than that from you. What could have possibly been going through your mind? This is a disaster. I think he called the fall off the beam by Alicia Sacramone a disaster of epic proportions, like it was some sort of like tornado or earthquake. But it's less the sort of exaggeration than that they sound. Like if you've had a coach who just can't keep things in perspective, it's not like, you screwed up, you should fix that. But people make mistakes. That's the nature of sports. It's the nature of the Olympics. People screw up. It's like they can't believe that anyone could possibly fall off the balance beam. Yes.
No. I have nothing to add to what you've just said, except I agree completely. The sense of proportion.
Thank you, Jen.
Seems to have been lost. Along with Canadian medal hopes. I mean, it's just.
In lockstep with Canadian medal hopes.
Yeah, exactly. The things that these people, both the men and the women, I find it more disturbing with the women because they either are or look so young. But what they have done to their bodies and the sacrifices that they have no doubt made are of such epic proportions that the notion of speaking of them in that way, I don't know. I mean, what happens in football is if a receiver drops a pass, do they just kind of go, he dropped another one? I mean, how is it different?
Well, I think it has something to do with the Olympics only being every 4 years, and these commentators are all sort of past gymnasts. I mean, that's not obviously any different from football where you have ex-jocks in the booth. But I think Daggett, his whole life and livelihood is based on the fact that he got a perfect 10 in the 1984 Olympics. That's like his whole essence of his being. So I think that's sort of how you lose perspective. Whereas like maybe in a football game, I mean, obviously if you drop a touchdown pass in the Super Bowl, it's sort of going to change your life. But it seems like the announcers are like a little more dispassionate and will just kind of say, that guy dropped the ball, that was sort of bad, that's going to cost his team, and maybe the next day, sort of talk radio and newspaper columnists will say that the guy really screwed the pooch. But in the Olympics, it's all just sort of combined instantly. It's like instant acknowledgement of a screw up, as well as they always have to comment on, what history is going to make of this performance. It's like sort of instant. Both instant analysis and instant sort of contextualization of what this means for the past and future of mankind or something.
Well, what's wrong with that? No, I think you're right. And plus it's the whole and it's the whole nationalistic thing that we talked about in our last conversation. This is for America. This isn't just Fred Smith going for the ball in the triple Sacco or whatever. This is for America. This is our nation up against the great power to the east. There's far too much put on these young people's shoulders, and it seems that they're putting a lot on their own shoulders too. I mean, just again, not to harp too much on this, but just the look on Alicia Sacramone's face. The torture,
which NBC was thrilled to show us for a minute.
in pure close-up. I mean, it was, and it actually was. It was in some ways it was beautiful. I mean, the way that she was fighting, you know, that she wasn't going to cry. Why couldn't she cry? I mean, it was very emotional. It was all the things that we're supposed to want to see in a sporting event, or the things that I like to see.
If we're gonna keep put a silver lining on this and sort of getting back to what you were talking about before, she more than most, or I think more than anyone on the Chinese women's team, although I could be wrong about this, is a grown woman. You know, I think she's 20 or 21 years old.
Yes.
But getting back to your point about the sort of appearance of the Chinese gymnast, you know, there was this whole controversy of whether their birth certificates or whatever other records were falsified, and whether they had met the minimum age standard, and just sort of looking, you know, eyeballing these girls, you know, they're definitely girls and not women.
Right.
And that,
which brings,
it seemed like you couldn't just account for that because of the sort of puberty being staved off because of the sort of rigorous training they have to go through. I mean, irrespective of that, they just looked like they were 12.
Yes. It looked like they'd maybe only had 3 broken legs and 2 pulled shoulders. You know, they just hadn't suffered like the 18-year-olds, the 16-year-olds. But actually, that does bring us back to where we started with Robert Lipsyte and Brian Curtis's conversation, and whether the because you know I like to ogle just as much as the next person, but I found these games to be peculiarly and surprisingly sensual. I mean, I would make one exception, which is the swimmers and the divers, the men. You know, they have been showing off their bodies. When Phelps and his colleagues on the 4x100 meter freestyle relay team were, you know, doing their celebration flexing, it was, you know, it might as well have been, you know, one of those, you know, health education films from the 50s. I mean, they have really gorgeous bodies, but there's very little
Let's get that out in the open.
Right. Let's just stipulate to that.
Let us stipulate to that.
But otherwise, it's weirdly unsexy. You know, I don't know if it's
Do you think it's the Speedo, full body suits that everyone is wearing? Is that part of it?
It may be. I mean, I don't know. I perhaps I'm too afraid to analyze.
Is our technology dehumanizing us and turning us into sexless sports robots?
You know, all I know is that about 11:30 every night, I just like to look at the Twitter feed from Slate Olympics. So, you know, it is technology that's spoiling us all. But
that's good. That's good.
Yeah, but and I think, but also the fact that the gymnasts, I mean, again, the male gymnasts, their bodies are in many ways, you know, the perfect body, and yet they are curiously antiseptic. They're kind of somewhat robotic, even though, you know, the US men's team, we heard what terrible routines they did. But, you know, so, you know, perhaps they're not perfect. But, yeah, oddly, I'm running out of words to express unsexual, but that has surprised me.
Let's get to the root of the problem here. With the American men's gymnasts, they just had some serious hair problems.
They did.
You know, I don't know if there was too much gel going on, or in some cases not enough, but it just was not working. I mean, they look like sort of O-Town or 98 Degrees or one of those other sort of boy band troops from the 90s, and that sort of perception was not helped by the fact that every time you know, NBC would put a boom mic over the huddle, they would be saying things like, "Let's show what the USA is all about, man."
That was not a kindness to microphone.
But you think
their
even the
impromptu pep talks.
non-American, non-boy band looking gymnasts were somehow more, I don't know if it's robotic or
it's just not sexy. It's
to the eye.
Yeah, it's almost inhuman. I mean, again, on paper, they're hot as hell. In practice, there's something cold and almost inhuman about them.
And you think this is a change from past Olympics, or is this something about Olympians in general?
Perhaps it's the first week of the Olympics. Perhaps it's the nature of kind of bodies being exposed but not being allowed to do more than very carefully choreographed movements. I don't know. I don't want to get too academic about it, but I think also when it comes to the gymnasts, the stirrup pants don't help. Somebody needs to step in and have an intervention on the stirrup.
I mean, we haven't had the hammer throw yet.
No.
We haven't. What else? We haven't had synchronized swimming. I mean, I think there's still many opportunities for some of our more beautiful Olympians to start their stuff.
No,
but before we get too far
yes.
afield, and look on to the hammer throw, I think we need to deal with the Michael Phelps phenomenon. And
yes.
Why don't you go ahead, June, and sort of give your thoughts as a somebody in Canada who's been watching this, probably one of the greatest Americans to ever live, do this thing in the last week.
Well, so NBC would have us believe. Well, I came into these Olympics. I was already tired of Michael Phelps after watching the Olympic trials, and Ron MacLean, who's the he's the kind of the Bob Costas of Canada, and he on the first or maybe even the second day of the Olympics. What an honor,
the Bob Costas
I know,
of Canada.
Absolutely. By the second day, I think he was already saying that he was bored of Michael Phelps, or apologizing for all of the attention being paid to Michael Phelps. But he stopped.
Can you tell me something? Not to interrupt, but the day of the 4x100 men's freestyle relay, which I think, the one where Jason Lezak came back to beat the French team, giving Michael Phelps a gold medal. What was declared the moment of the day on Canadian television that day?
Well, there were three choices, and one of them was the 4x100 meter comeback win.
So it was nominated. It
was nominated. There were three choices. The second choice, actually, I thought in rather poor taste, was Katie Hoff not winning her race that day.
Okay.
And which I think that probably set the tone. And then the other choice was obviously the big story of the Olympics, which is the success of the Canadian men's 8 in the rowing regatta. They won their opening heat handily.
So they won their opening heat.
Their opening heat, yes, that's right. And that, my friend, was declared the Olympic moment of the day, or the Olympic, which
so
I think
gives us some
all.
Insight into the propaganda we've been seeing from our friends north of the border.
That's right. However, so all of that said, I think, let me speak for Canada here, and Ron MacLean, and myself. Okay. It's a really good story. Michael Phelps, as a person, I find, again, cold, uninteresting, but the search for the 8, and I don't like the notion of if he wins 8 gold medals, he's the best Olympian, because, as it happens, swimming, I mean, clearly he's a magnificent swimmer, stipulated, but, there are so many opportunities for winning medals, as there are in gymnastics,
sure.
As there are in, anytime you can have relays, anytime you can compete in multiple events, when you've qualified for them, you've got a chance to win more medals. Does that make you a greater Olympian? Nevertheless, it's a really good story. I think you'd have to have a heart of stone not to be.
So you're not. You're no longer bored by him.
Well, I'm bored by him, but I'm energized by his quest. I find him. When he's up there, on the medal stand. Which I love medal ceremonies, and I think the only ones I've actually seen with the anthem playing is 3 of his. He's got that big Boris Karloff head, and the camera seems to really focus in on his mouth for some reason. I don't understand.
Right.
And so I don't know why I'm so into it, but I'm pulling for him to win all 8. And I don't.
Okay, so a couple thoughts on.
Yes.
On Phelps, you're right that
yes.
The big focus has been on his quest to win 8 and how that'll make him. He's already he's won the most gold medals of any Olympic athlete, and how he's going for 8 golds and 8 world records. But I think for NBC, more than any of that, he is sort of the guy who's carrying them to ratings glory. So
yes.
On account of that, they need him to be a compelling figure personally. And, the games are so personality driven, and they've focused so much on his mother and, how he was raised by this one woman, and his personal story of, how he was coached by Bob Bowman, and, since he was 11 years old.
Canadian, by the way, I believe.
To be an Olympic champion. So they've devoted so much energy into building him up into being this personality. And, he's just not a really compelling sort of interview. He's not,
right.
I don't know, he leaves me a little cold when they chat sort of by the pool. And, the one moment when we really did see his personality was when he was cheering on his teammates in the 4x100 relay, when he was doing that weird sort of like Mr. Universe muscle man sort of pose at the end of the race, and just screaming himself hoarse. And
it's funny, I didn't think you were going to cite that. I thought you were going to cite it's now happened twice apparently, but in the butterfly where his goggles filled up with water, and he's at the end of the race, which of course he still won going away and with the world record. He threw off the goggles, and he was obviously extremely upset with Speedo, but we will ignore that. And that seemed, there was something about it. I mean, it was petulant, it was annoyance, but it seemed really real, just as the celebration did. I mean, there was clearly no acting in either of those expressions, but it did feel odd that we actually had what felt like a natural, unplanned, unprogrammed, just scream or
no, you're right, and and sort of his problem is that his winning has become sort of so rote and so expected that we're at this point we're looking for things like that, obstacles that we can throw at him, and it's sort of hilarious to think about like water in the goggles being like the biggest challenge that Michael Phelps had to overcome.
Exactly.
But Jesse Owens had to overcome X. Michael Phelps overcomes water in his goggles.
Totally. But there's another thing though that's...
the French thrown in there as like another obstacle, and that certainly worked. And as we've seen, the French are just an incredibly sort of easy target. And
wasn't it so perfect that it was France? I mean, if it had been...
It was.
Any other country, but there was just that extra frisson, if you will allow me to throw in a bit of French, that do we like anything more than cheering against the French? Personally, cheering against the Belgians, but that's just me.
Well, the Belgians just didn't show up this year, so we have to make do with what we had.
Right now in Liège, they're talking about their lack of
and
medals.
That guy, Alain Bernard, who looked like he had his head shrunk by a witch doctor. I mean, that guy was sort of the perfect villain. He looks like a friend told me, like that French actor who played the villain in Ocean's 12. I can't think of the guy's name right now. The cat burglar. He looks like that guy on steroids.
Yeah.
What better villain could you have these days?
Exactly. There's an odd thing that I've seen in, the Canadians, as I said, did I mention they haven't won any medals yet, but they've actually had a really good meet, as I guess swimmers refer to their competitions. And, for example, in that 4x100 meter relay, they broke the world, their time beat what had been the world record before that race. Unfortunately, 5 teams finished ahead of them. We've heard a lot about why records are breaking, but nevertheless, they are swimming really well, and yet they are making no impression. And I think I've been hearing in a lot of interviews, either people just kind of acknowledging that Phelps is going to win, or in diving, well, the Chinese are going to win, but we might still win a medal. I mean, and these are athletes who are participating, who are there, who have done all these things that the Olympic athletes do for 4 years so that this can be their day. And they're already, speaking of French people, they're already waving the flag. They already know that they're not going to, they don't even seem to believe that they can win because there are these people who are almost superhuman, and that's.
Right.
I have not enjoyed that. I think it's great to be realistic. I also, wrinkle my brow when people who clearly have no chance talk about how they're gonna go all the way, and yet, ...
And yet, well, we've seen the sort of medal race play out like a lot of people predicted it would, with China and the United States neck and neck, and it's been really interesting to see, and very predictable, but still interesting, that NBC, when they show the medal table, they show it by total medals, in the United States, as of the time we're recording this, or as of the last time I looked, was beating China 29-27.
Yes.
A correspondent of ours who wrote for Slate a piece about watching Chinese television, they have a little bug in the corner of the screen that shows the medal table at all times, and it shows the count by gold medals won, and China's way in front of the United States.
Right.
I think it was something like 17 to 10, and I think the perception in the States is that China is loading up on medals and events that we do not care about, such as the air pistol, and the 20-meter air pistol, and the 40-meter air pistol.
And 3 positions, yes.
Yes, and the perception in China, I take it, is that all these events that the Chinese are winning and all these gold medals are hugely significant, and a sign, that China, had this plan, this goal to win, and they've won in, lots of different disciplines. Maybe they're not popular in America, but they've won in many different sports, and I think the golds are seen as a sign of huge success, not as any sort of strategy paying off or anything. It's seen as the country achieving like they wanted to achieve. As
Al Trotwig would say, it's the China syndrome.
Oh man!
Or is there a new China syndrome?
Make him stop.
No, there's only a few more days of gymnastics, so maybe he'll go home then. Yes, I'm very aware of this trend of how do
they show the medal table in Canada? Do they show the teams with 0 medals first?
They tend to stay quiet about the medal table here in Canada. It is funny how they show the top 4, and then they don't show it on television that I can recall, but in the newspapers, there are the top 4, and then there's Canada. It's a little. It's almost as if it's sad. It's harsh. But I personally, China's doing it. I think they're having a really great Olympics. In many ways, in sports, I mean, in the diving, they don't just win. It's as if they've had one extra jump. I mean, one extra dive. They're absolutely killing the rest of the world in diving. They've won a couple of swimming medals, which is a very good sign, because it's it really counters that view that they win in these events that no one watches. They win in the events that are on television.
Yeah, China really cares about diving. They care about gymnastics. It's not like they're winning in events that the country has never shown any interest in. I mean, swimming is obviously something where they're really coming on, and they didn't really have that tradition. Right. So it's a combination of everything. They're having a great Olympics by any measure.
Yeah, and even outside. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to move the topic perhaps further than you wanted to how the off the playing fields, as it were, how China's doing after 5 or 6 days of competition or of attention from the rest of the world.
How are they doing in respect to putting on the games as opposed to performing?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it feels like the first week is a lot of the events that are televised are indoors. Obviously, the beach volleyball, which I don't get. I don't understand why people are so obsessed with beach volleyball. But anyway,
we didn't mention that when talking about the non-sensuality of the Olympics.
Yeah.
I mean, have you noted, June, that the beach volleyball women are playing in microscopic bathing suits?
I believe the term, which I believe I also invented, is skimpikinis. Yeah, they do seem to kind of defy science.
Oh, that's a great coinage.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can introduce it sneakily into usage. Yeah, I mean, I don't do anything for me, I gotta say. I would love to know why the women wore those science-defying skin bikinis, and the men seem to wear kind of baggy tank tops and long shorts. What's with that?
They don't wear tank tops, I don't think, but they do wear the baggy shorts. I think it's just purely like a marketing thing, and I think the league, the beach volleyball league in America, they actually like made that the uniform just because they wanted to draw in more viewers. I mean, they succeeded in making beach volleyball a primetime sport in America. I mean, I think part of that has to do with the fact that Misty and Carrie, as I call them, the Golden Girls, seem like a lock to win the gold medal. And so women in skimpy teenies who are locked to win the gold equals guaranteed primetime coverage.
Yeah. Well, we were talking the other day about, like, what's coming next week. I personally love track and field, but as you pointed out, they're going to be, the timing of those events is not going to be good for NBC. There really isn't a big diving. Well, diving, that's pretty compelling, but the television, this is a glorious first week, but then are we going to go into free fall, or are we just taking vicarious pleasure in predicting that when it's really not going to happen?
Well, NBC clearly wishes that Michael Phelps were going to be running in the 200 meters
right.
next week. He's carried them so far, and there's no big sort of superstar on the track. Maybe a story will develop kind of organically, but I don't think anything organic usually happens in the Olympics. That's a little unfair, but we're going to know all the results 12 hours in advance. No sort of superstars. I'm not like terribly optimistic that NBC is going to do well. The ratings are going to be good. Not that I really care how they fare. So, just more as a viewer, it's obviously less compelling if you know the results already. I'm not going to try to go into some sort of black hole and not know what happens. I mean, that's a futile proposition.
And it's, even though when it comes to the gymnasts, obviously they change from Olympics to Olympics because, they're not going to be 16 next time around, and that does seem to be a huge advantage.
They're not going to be 10 next time around.
Exactly. But because they, at least in the beginning, the focus is on the team. You kind of get to root for them as a representative of the USA, and then they differentiate themselves. And so after a few days, you're kind of, you're kind of pulling for Nastia, or you're pulling for Sean. Whereas, on the track, they're just a bunch of individuals, and I also, I don't know that we really have a sense of who's our opposition, except maybe in the sprint events where we know about Usain Bolt and Asafa Powell.
Right. In
any other events, I'm having a hard time thinking of the big opposition because when you're rooting for, you usually need that that French team to root against to make it really good. And I don't so I think the second week inevitably will be a little bit less exciting.
Right, and maybe the answer is just going to be that we're going to get more to fill in that gap. We're just going to get more sort of soft focus profiles. Right. I mean, Lopez, Lemon,
right.
The flag bearer, the former lost boy, Zidane is obviously going to be a huge story. So I mean, it's going to be sort of up to that sort of stagecraft, I think, to try to elevate it into something of popular interest. But one thing that I also wanted to talk about, and it'll be interesting to see how this changes once we get to track. We've seen all these world records in swimming, but we haven't seen anybody get caught up in doping allegations or anything like that. What do you make of that?
I'm surprised. I think the last time I looked, there was just one positive test in this whole games, which was...
There are several before the game started, but...
Yeah. I mean, and there's always that... there are two things that always kind of set an antenna going. The first is, she came from nowhere, which we heard yesterday about some of the swimmers. And you almost wonder if it's being said intentionally, if it's just...
She came from a test tube.
She came from nowhere. When the Chinese swimmers, they won gold and silver, I think, yesterday in I'm forgetting which race. I think more than once the commentators said, she's really burst onto the world scene. And which always suggests to me...
That's coded language, obviously.
Exactly. It is coded language. And then the other time when you...
And it's not just the Chinese. There are several Australian swimmers and Americans, I think, too. The Dutch, or actually Europeans generally, I think, are much more prone to this. You get the Irish swimmer or the Dutch swimmer, although obviously the Dutch program is pretty strong and has been for a long time, but still, who comes from nowhere and, sets new records and then disappears. And then the other side of that is when leading athletes, have last-minute injuries or anxiety attacks or whatever it is, that at the last minute prevents them from taking part in the games. But one positive test, and it was before the event, so it wasn't. The thing that I hate is when, the medals are decided, and then it turns out that one of the people on the podium tests positive, and that's always just. But there's the specter of that happening, right? Since it's happened so many times. In the past. The Olympic results are just never set in stone. I think the 2000 4x400 U.S. relay team, and I think it included Michael Johnson, just was stripped of its medals recently.
Exactly.
So, none of these results are ironclad, and it just sort of makes you wonder. And sort of to connect the last two topics that we were talking about, the problem with sort of foregrounding these sorts of out of nowhere stories and these profiles of athletes, and focusing on the ones who've come out of nowhere, is that those are precisely the ones where you can't help but thinking that they might be cheating.
Right.
So you have this sort of I don't know if there's any way to resolve that. Of course, you think the ones that are dominant are cheating too. So
exactly, and in some ways,
from there.
Exactly. I mean, the thing with the swimming meet is things have gone largely as expected, which might be good, or might mean that their doping procedures are foolproof, or they've got a really great masking technique, or whatever. I mean, and the fact that we're even mentioning that possibility is depressing and sad, but there you go.
So is that what we can sort of root for in the next 2 weeks? You're right that the closest thing we've had to like an upset or something that didn't go to form was that 4x100 relay. I'm sure I'm overlooking something in a sport that's a little bit more off the front page. But is that what we need to sort of salvage a second week that looks like they're just fewer sort of superstars and events that sort of jump to mind immediately?
I guess. I mean, I think we're going to have... I think what you said earlier about putting ourselves in NBC's hands, or, broadcasters around the world will be giving us the big narrative, and maybe we just have to, give ourselves over to it and just let the snark kick in and make our little comments out the sides of our mouths and feel superior and, wipe away tissues, as Mary Carrillo makes another... lovely point. Well, can I just really give a plug? I just have to say that I was Mary Carrillo's biggest fan when she was a tennis player, which I didn't have a lot of competition. I used to have a hat that said Carrillo's Cowboys, for example.
I noticed that your hat was pluralized, but were you the only person who had one?
No, actually, there were two. I had a friend who also was a big fan of Mary Carrillo.
Okay, good. Just checking. Yeah, just checking your grammar there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it's always good to keep me on my toes. But I just as much as I don't really care for those features, I think if anybody has to do them, Mary Carrillo does them better than anyone else could possibly do them. And she's
you really
just
thought
awesome,
that those features were worthwhile. I mean, the first one was like, look at all this stuff in China that's so big. There's a big train and a guy who is also
and a really
big.
tall guy.
So they're connected.
Yeah,
I felt really bad as a tall man. I felt extremely bad for the tall man.
Well, she's a tall woman, you know. I mean, I know every time I see you, I always say, "Oh, Josh, you're so tall." And the fact that Mary Carrillo, a tall woman, you know, kind of said on national television, he was such a tall man. Yeah, it was a bit embarrassing, but, you know,
I think you're probably the only person in the world who knows that Mary Carrillo is tall. I think that subtlety was lost on people as they were looking at the gigantic Chinese man who was more than 8 feet tall as she was sort of standing and pointing at him. I got to stand up for my tall brothers here.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
But aside from the Mary Carrillo features next week, and aside from just making fun of NBC, I am looking forward to Powell versus Bolt versus Tyson Gay in the 100 meters. That's my pick to click for next week.
The only thing with that is that the final's Sunday, right? I mean, the 100 meter sprint is the kind of the big first event. It's funny how the big event, the kind of the big climax for running has typically been the 1500 meters, and although that is where Lopez Lemong and the other, the U.S. athlete who was born in Kenya has an even better chance of medaling than Lopez Lemong. So, I mean, there are those good stories, but I just feel like on both the men's and women's side, the 1500 meters has been a little bit of late.
There is the marathon's traditionally the last event, right? And there's a suspense of seeing if any athletes actually die because of pollution.
Right. No,
so there's going to be that frisson hanging over the last week.
Oh, hey, wait to get your New Orleans French in there. Appreciate that.
Les bon temps roulé, June.
Right on, my brother.
I think that's maybe a good way to sign off.
Indeed. Well, it was great talking Olympics with you, Josh, and look forward to that second week. And go Canada.
Go Canada. Beat Togo. All right. Bye, June.
Bye, Josh.